There was no storm that night. August 21st, 1986, in the green highlands of northwestern Cameroon. No wind, no thunder, no shaking of the ground. In the villages around Lake Nyos, Kam, Cha, Subum, the people were asleep. There was nothing to wake them. Something came down out of the hills in the dark. It had no color and no smell and made no sound. It moved down the valleys like water finding the low ground, and where it went, it pushed the air out ahead of it. One moment, there was air to breathe. The next, there wasn't. Across 4 villages, 1,746 people died in their sleep and never knew that anything had happened. By morning, the only thing left in the valley was the silence. To understand Lake Nyos, you have to look under the water. It's a crater lake, sitting in old volcanic country, deep, still and beautiful, ringed by green hills. From the surface, it is one of the most peaceful places you could imagine. But underneath it, for years, something had been building that had no business being in a lake at all. Deep below Lake Nyos, magma still stirs in the roots of the old volcano, and it breathes out carbon dioxide, the same gas that puts the fizz in a soda. That gas seeps up through the rock and into the very bottom of the lake. And here is the trap. Lake Nyos is so deep, and its layers of water so undisturbed, that the cold, heavy water at the bottom never mixes with the warmer water at the top, so the gas has nowhere to go. It stays dissolved down there in the deep water, held in place by the sheer weight and pressure of everything above it. Year after year, decade after decade, more and more of it. Think of a bottle of soda. As long as the cap is screwed down, the gas stays invisible and calm, dissolved in the liquid, held there by pressure. You would never guess how much was waiting inside just by looking at it. Lake Nyos had become a bottle of soda 1.5 miles across, and it had been quietly charging for a very long time. It didn't need to be opened, it only needed to be shaken. It had happened before, and nobody understood the warning. 2 years earlier, in 1984, a smaller crater lake in the same part of Cameroon, Lake Monoun, had done the very same thing. One night, it let go a burst of gas that killed 37 people along a nearby road. At the time, no one could really explain it. The idea that a quiet lake could suddenly exhale and kill everyone near it was so strange, so far outside ordinary experience, that it had no name most people would recognize. So the lesson from Monoun sat there, unlearned. It had been a small rehearsal for something the scientists were only beginning to suspect was possible. And a few valleys away, a far larger bottle was sitting almost full, with thousands of people living in the low ground below it. On the night of the 21st of August, something disturbed the deep water of Lake Nyos. We still aren't certain what, most likely a landslide slipping off the crater wall into the lake, or a small shift of the ground, or even just the slow physics of an overcharged lake reaching its limit. It didn't take much, just enough to nudge a little of that deep, gas-heavy water upward. And once it started, it could not stop. As the deep water rose even slightly, the pressure holding the gas down eased, and the gas began to come out of solution, which pushed the water up faster, which released more gas, faster still. In seconds, the whole lake was turning itself over. A fountain of water and foam blew nearly 100 meters into the night sky. A wave more than 20 meters high tore around the shoreline and stripped the vegetation off it. The surface of the lake dropped by about 1 meter as it emptied its lungs. And churned up from the depths, iron in the water met the air and rusted, turning the calm blue lake a deep, sickly red. In a matter of moments, Lake Nyos released something like a cubic kilometer of carbon dioxide, hundreds of thousands of tons of it, into the still night air above the valley. It was invisible, it was heavier than air, and it began to flow downhill. Carbon dioxide does not rise and drift away. It is half again as heavy as ordinary air, so it sinks, and it pools, and it hunts the low ground. The gas came off the lake as a cloud, perhaps 50 meters thick, and poured down into the valleys, silent, unseen, moving somewhere between 20 and 50 kilometers an hour, and reaching as far as 15 miles from the shore. It didn't burn. It didn't roar. It simply flowed into the villages and filled them, and where it filled them, it pushed the breathable air up and out, so that there was nothing left to breathe but gas. The people in its path were asleep. Almost none of them woke. There was no fire to run from, and no sound to run from. The cloud took the air out of a room so gently and so completely that people simply stopped breathing where they lay. Some 3,500 head of cattle died the same way, dropped in the fields exactly where they'd been standing. Birds fell, insects fell. For roughly 15 miles down those valleys, almost everything that breathed stopped. A few people lived, mostly those who happened to be on higher ground, above where the heavy gas settled, or who were simply blindly lucky. And what they woke to was worse than any sound could have been. A man named Joseph Nquain from the village of Subum was one of the ones who lived, and he described what it was to wake up inside it. He couldn't speak. When he tried, no breath would come. He smelled something terrible, and he felt strangely weak, and his body wouldn't obey him. He noticed his skin was marked and stained, as if he'd been burned or bruised in his sleep. He could hear his young daughter breathing in a strange, wrong way in the dark, and by the time he could reach her, she was already dead. He went to his neighbors' houses. Everyone in them was dead. He walked out through the village, and there was nothing, no voice, no animal, no movement anywhere. He said afterward that as he went through Nyos, he did not see a single living thing. People who reached the villages later that day described them the same way, again and again, a place that looked completely untouched and was completely dead. No wreckage, no fire. Houses standing whole, doors shut, and inside whole families lying as if still asleep, unmarked. Cattle, down in the green fields, as though they'd simply laid down to rest. One of the scientists who came later reached for the only comparison that fit and called it the aftermath of a neutron bomb. Everything living gone and everything built left standing. Around 4,000 people fled the region in the days that followed, walking out of a place that had killed almost everyone in it without a sound. Roughly 850 survivors were treated for burns, breathing damage, and paralysis left behind by the gas. Many carried something no hospital could treat. They had gone to sleep in ordinary villages full of family and neighbors, and woken up as almost the only people left alive. For a long time afterward, the villages simply stood there, empty, houses whole, fields green, and no one willing to go back and live under the lake that had done this. It is one thing to fear a mountain that erupts, or a river that floods. It is another to fear a quiet blue lake that gives no sign at all. Lake Nyos is one of only a tiny handful of lakes on Earth known to do this. What happened there in 1986 is still the deadliest natural release of gas in recorded history. But once scientists understood the mechanism, they realized the danger could actually be diffused, because the lake was still charging. The gas hadn't stopped seeping in. Left alone, the bottle would simply fill again, and one day shake again. So a French scientist named Michel Halboix and his colleagues did something almost absurdly simple. They ran a pipe from the surface of the lake down into the deep, gas-heavy water at the bottom. They primed it with a pump, and once the gas-rich water started up the pipe and the pressure dropped, the gas came fizzing out of it and drove the water up on its own, a self-sustaining fountain, bleeding the carbon dioxide off into the open air a little at a time. The first pipe went in 2001, more followed. Today, the lake vents itself, steadily and safely, and the charge that killed the valley can never build to that point again. The lake is still there. The water is still deep, but the cap is no longer screwed down tight. Most disasters announce themselves. A siren, a tremor, a wall of water you can at least see coming. Lake Nyos gave the people around it. None of that. No sound, no warning, no chance to run. The danger had been sitting under that calm, beautiful surface the whole time, for as long as any of them had been alive, and on one ordinary August night, it simply rose up and took the air out of the world. The pipes hiss quietly over the water now, letting the pressure out one breath at a time. The lake looks exactly as beautiful as it always did. That was always the problem.